Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of the Honest Mamas podcast. This is Melissa, and today I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Dr. Shefali Tsabary. Dr. Shefali is an acclaimed author, worldwide speaker, and psychologist. You've probably heard of her books, The Conscious Parent, The Awakened Family, and Out of Control. You may have also seen her work with Oprah. Today we talk about conscious parenting. Let's dive right on in. Here's my conversation with Dr. Shefali. Dr. Shefali, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's dive right on in because I know our listeners are so wanting to hear this information. And I thought we could start with what landed you on this journey of helping parents discover themselves as they become parents? What kind of got you on this path?
Well, I think part of it was my own clinical work as a psychologist with families and seeing that despite parents' best efforts and endeavors, they still couldn't really see their children for who it is they were. And the reason for this really is because of the parents' own past. So I began to notice these trends and wonder how it is I can help parents to look past their own projections, transcend their own conditioning, heal their own wounds, so that they could then be present for their children as their children are in their true state. And then I think my own personal experience becoming a parent and seeing how my own wounds of the past that I didn't even know were there were reactivated because of this very intimate relationship. And I began to, try to find a way to help parents elevate and began to see that the children come to us really for this reason, for us to elevate and us to heal our own unmet needs and our past wounds.
Absolutely. And is this, I was thinking a lot about your book, The Conscious Parenting, and I'm curious kind of what inspired you to write that book.
Well, I've been a follower of Eastern philosophy and a Vipassana meditator since my early 20s. So I began to apply the principles of mindfulness and the principles of Eastern philosophy, which is really living in the now, the impermanent nature of reality and ourselves, the fact that we have this thing called conditioning, and most of our reality is based on projection, not on the truth of it. So I began to apply that in parenting, both in my own parenting journey and with clients. And I began to see that when we do live in the now, when we do introduce presence, when we do transcend conditioning, then we can make parenting a joyful experience. Otherwise, it becomes so stress-inducing and imposing not only for the parents, but also for the children, because the children don't get to be seen for who it is they are.
Absolutely. And you talk a lot about this. I completely agree that we constantly as parents, you said a quote which I thought so resonated, which was love equals the absence of ego. And yes. I think that touches on that point. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, I think one of the greatest myths of parenting is that, we do it out of love. And I think there is a lot of love involved, but it's love that's tinged with a sense of possession and control, which quickly becomes enmeshment and deep, knotted, entangled relationships. So our children then suffer because of that, because they are constantly fighting against us because we are fighting against their true nature. So love without consciousness is really just a guise for possession and control, unless we're very, very careful. And the ego, which is not just narcissism, it's a very particular mechanism within the psyche that gets created because we ourselves weren't seen for our true selves. So we had to create a defense mechanism to protect ourselves. So this is the ego. But now we're operating from ego, which is a false state of being, and constantly then not in touch with who it is we are. And therefore, we're not going to be in touch with who our children are.
Right. And so how do parents, a lot of this information that you share and a lot of the things that I've read and seen absolutely makes sense to me. I'm in the psychology field and I'm right on board with you. And I'm thinking about some of the listeners that may be having a hard time trying to really put into practical terms what this may look like, what it may sound like. And as a parent to two very, I have a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, even with all this psychological training and all the ways I try to bring in mindfulness, I definitely hit those moments where my ego gets involved or I want them to do something a certain way. So for all those parents out there struggling, particularly with younger children, what does that balance look like between allowing them to be who they are and then also, obviously you have to get up and get out the door?
Well, I think we must be grounded first in a very disciplined practice of our own inner attunement. That needs to be the first place we start, where we're constantly as parents, attuned. I think what you're asking is how do you do it in the moment? And I always say the moment can't come into fruition in its most exalted conscious way if all the moments preceding it did not have consciousness. So we have to kind of work backwards and look at how we have been and what we are doing in all the moments preceding. So we have to develop a practice of mindfulness, which is attuning to the breath or whatever kind of mindfulness practice people, veer towards. We must develop that so that when we're in the moment where being is truly colliding with doing, where consciousness is being pulled in 10 different directions, where you want to connect, but you really need to correct, then in those moments, yes, you do need to, quote unquote, find a way to make your kid do something, but it'll be done from the energetic place of playfulness and curiosity and creativity. And you will keep a watchful, vigilant eye on when it becomes excessive control. And because you would have also worked on yourself, you would be aware of how your children evoke helplessness, evoke guilt, evoke your own shame. So that in those moments when you are at odds, you're in touch with your own emotions of helplessness, guilt, and shame. So you're beginning to see, it's not my kid. I'm just being re-triggered because I used to be helpless as a kid. And now this kid is re-evoking that feeling in me. And I want to act like a 3-year-old right now and have a tantrum worse than my 3-year-old. So you begin to understand that there's a lot going on inside you that needs to be addressed, that your kid is re-evoking, but is not necessarily manipulatively here to destroy you. They're re-evoking past wounds in you. So it's complex. Your question seems simple, but it cannot be done in a simple way. You see, it needs to be a concerted, disciplined, entire philosophical approach to life. Then in that moment, you can have a shot at being aware. How can you be aware in the moment if you haven't developed awareness for the many moments preceding that, you see?
Absolutely. 1,000% agree with you. And I'm just curious, as you're talking, I'm also thinking like this information is so useful and so wonderful, and it hits to me to be so true. Why do you think, I'll speak for our culture here in the US, why do you think that hasn't been more part of the discussion for years and years and years and years?
Because nothing new really gets to be part of the discussion. Everything is, as you can see, is institutionalized, is wretchedly reeking of tradition and the way things are and conformity and conditions that have been preset over eons. So nothing really changes. I mean, look at our religious institutions. They've kind of stayed the same. There is no new Buddha coming or new Jesus coming. I mean, it is kind of the same because we are ultimately conditioned creatures of habit. Same with the paradigm of parenting. It's kind of steeped in tradition and archaic parameters that no one dares to bust because it works for the adult. We want to discipline our kids. We want to put them into timeout. We want to have control. And here I come and I debunk that and I question that, and no one wants to hear that because now I'm making parents think. I'm making parents dig in. I'm making parents stop and not just unleash and question themselves and take themselves to the chopping block and go and deconstruct why it is you did that. Why were you triggered? What trigger was in you that was re-evoked by this situation? What about you is in this situation? How have you created the rebellious child? How can you organize your life? How can you simplify, right? So I put so much onus on the parent.
Right.
No parent wants to hear that. They're like, we're so busy. We don't have time to be mindful.
Right. And do you find that a lot of the parents that you've worked with or met with all of a sudden are open to this work and having this dialogue with you because something's not working in their parenting because they've never ever had self-reflection before? Like when people find your work, what kind of state are they in?
Well, both a crisis state, but also a clarity of wanting deeper awareness, and that something is not working, both in the parent-child relationship, but really in their own lives, that they're not enjoying this parenting process. This is not what it was meant to be. Mm-hmm. And typically the people who veer towards my teachings are looking and longing for some deeper connection to self and other. So you won't get the run-of-the-mill parent following my work. You'll get, not that the other parents are run-of-the-mill, but what I mean is it's just not just a parent. It's a parent who has definitely decided that they want a different approach to life and living. And they are going to sacrifice and compromise on old and past belief systems in order to embrace something new and daring.
And it's not too late that once they have a child and they're kind of smacked over the head with this reality of how challenging it is and how much goes back to their wounding and their pieces of themselves, it's not too late for them to start that journey, right?
Well, it's never too late, but there's also some optimum windows. So, 0 to 7 is an optimum window to kind of lay it out. But no, it's never too late because you always have to become more conscious. You always have an opportunity to begin again. But you may have more to excavate now because of so much that has been put in, So, yeah, there'll be more to unload and unpack. But it's never too late because this is not about the kid. This is not about the other one. This is about you. So how can it ever be late to work on you?
Right. And so if we do kind of dive in a little bit deeper to the working on ourselves as parents, any tips, pieces that they can start working on now, kind of practical tools that would obviously in the moment of trigger, that's not the time to start figuring it out, but in the calmer moments, what do you recommend that parents can start doing to really bring more mindfulness into their life?
Then they're going to have to start, right? Start by they go to the gym or they go to church. They're going to have to start going to the temple of consciousness, which is just really starting to read self-help books, meditate, become aware, introduce presence, slow it down, clean it up. There's a whole course. Yeah, I teach tons of courses online, but they're courses that help you detoxify from past belief systems and begin charging your soul's batteries with a whole new language, with a whole new approach. But they're going to have to go seek it, just like they go seek the best school for their kid or the best gym for their bodies. They're going to have to go seek this and find their teachers and begin to follow their teachers.
I definitely resonated when you said, when a parent starts taking on the challenge of doing the work inside, how there can be so much more playfulness in the relationship between the child and the parent. And our podcast and our mission is to really support women on the motherhood journey. And I know that you've talked about there is such a deep spiritual connection between a mother and a child, and it's like being a bond like no other. I'm curious if you can help explain how children help mothers particularly grow and develop, if there's anything unique to that bond.
Oh, there's a lot unique to the mother-child bond. I mean, it is one of the most unique bonds possible, which is not shared by the father to his disadvantage, really. It's this biological bond that then supersedes, first all other bonds, and then secondly, it then bleeds into a psychological bond that can soon become a spiritual bond. So when the parent realizes and uses this very close biological prerogative that they have with this child, I mean, only the mother has this prerogative, that they begin to use this as a window to deeply connect with all sentient beings and with their own being, then the child can be, quote unquote, used for their potential to awaken the mother. The child becomes a mirror to the mother of all the ways she has not been mothered and the ways she needs to grow. So it depends on the mindset of the mother, though, that the mother needs to be aware that this child has come into her life for a very specific purpose, which is really for her awakening. And when she embraces that, then she can, quote unquote, use the child to really the reason the child came for.
Wonderful. And is there a reciprocity in that? You know, I hear that the child is coming to help the mother grow. Is there a reciprocity that the mother also is connected with the child and teaches the child in the ways that they need to grow too?
Of course. But ours is more pragmatic and more doing based. But the child could envelop the being spiritual qualities that the mother wants to put forth. But typically we do the practical and the pragmatic for the child. But the child is here to teach us spiritual lessons. The child, it doesn't bear the onus to learn the spiritual lessons from us. You see, They will learn it from their children. We have the onus. This is why we are parents, because there's a spiritual purpose here to discover who it is we are through the eyes of our children. Not to use them to simply aggrandize the self, but no, use them, quote unquote, use them to go within, to go deeper, to really look at the moment by moment as an invitation to heal the old stuff that's coming up in the parent.
I'm also thinking, I'm taking in all the rich information you're giving. It's so deep and it's so layered and it makes so much sense. And I'm also thinking about, the parent that wants to go in and, you're struggling at the mall with your child because they're throwing themselves on the floor and you're thinking, right, oh my God, you're totally embarrassing me. We have to leave. Pull yourself together. What are you doing? And just how, I know for myself, I'll speak for me, that I'm also perceiving everybody else's perception of, wow, you don't have control on your child. Wow, you're letting your child do that. Assert yourself. Be the parent. Don't let them steamroll you. And so I'm wondering if you encounter that with a lot of the mothers in particular that you work with, that in a way it's almost safer to stay in the old regime and yet it doesn't work.
Right. So just there, I would help the mother who was being onslaughted by all these thoughts of others' approval of her. And I would go deeper within the parent to go, what's coming up for you? Why is this coming up for you? What in your childhood made you so fear disapproval? And then why are you projecting onto these strangers that they are going to disapprove of you? Half the problem is there. Then the other problem is that you now are in a panic and helpless. Now you have no tools in your box. So now you want to control. And controlling doesn't work, right? So then I teach a third way. So first you become aware of why it is that you're even thinking people are disapproving of you. Where did that come from? Then your desire to control comes from the direct helplessness you felt around your desire for approval. And then you have to shift into a new way. You have to become aware, you have to pause, and then find a creative way to solve this problem. Either negotiate with the kid or play a game with the kid or, kind of create some sort of buy-in with the kid. But whatever you do, you'll do it from a place, even if you then decide to leave with the kid, you do it from a place of equanimity and power versus complete blind reactivity.
Yes, and potential rage and embarrassment and shame and frustration, all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I also love what you just said about how we go as parents from no tools to control. I think that is it's almost like a synapse in the brain. I know for myself, I don't know what to do in here. Let me just exert control, which never works. It never works.
I know. It's just the way we've been conditioned. We've been conditioned to react to helplessness. The moment we feel helpless when something in life doesn't go okay and our children react in disobedient, quote unquote, disobedient ways, or they make us flail in some sort of feeling of incompetence, our conditioning is all anxiety equals control. There's no gap in there. The synapse is cut off. So we just go directly from helplessness, anxiety equals control. Finish. End of story. That's how we were raised. That's how we are conditioned. We either go from anxiety to food, anxiety to alcohol, anxiety to gossip, anxiety to numbing of some way. With our children, we go anxiety to control. So how to break that and create a synapse is really the key here. How do you create that pause where you can reflect and go inward and stay inward till the most loving, compassionate response then gets evoked?
And I think with that too, we also start serving as models for our children in teaching them how to sit with the feelings, to sit with and pause and not project all over each other or react out of a reaction space, right?
Yes, exactly. So they will eventually learn from you, but you're not doing this again for them.
Right.
You're doing this for you. Right. And you have to just embody the state. And then if their consciousness is at the place that they can receive it and inculcate it in their own life, then that's what they'll do.
So just a few more questions for you. Just one of the last ones, just the biggest challenge that you notice in working with parents when they come to you, and from what you've shared, I hear, there usually is a little bit of openness, but when you get into the nitty gritty and when you start peeling back the layers, what do you notice is the biggest challenge that a mother, let's just be specific, a mother has to really face within herself to really be a more conscious parent?
I think most mothers suffer from a great deal of overdosing on empathy, and they don't have good boundaries, and they feel guilty to create boundaries, and they have poor self-care. So moment by moment, their boundaries get violated, and they have no idea how to say no, how to give from an authentic place. And so then by the end of the day, they're fried, they have no resources left, and they tend to lash out on their kids. So I think mothers in particular are notorious for poor self-care, poor boundaries, and overdosing on empathy and compassion to the point of it being delusional.
Wow. That definitely rings true. That feels like a truth bomb right there. And so to start working on more boundaries as women, we know that is maybe, generally speaking, a weak point. Any suggestions that you have on working with boundaries with children?
Well, I think, allowing them to say no as well, and hearing them and allowing for their no to have a might and right in the house will then allow them to have boundaries outside. But the unfortunate side to that is that you'll have to deal with the no's. Right? So we want them to be acquiescent at home, but then we want them to be able to have good boundaries outside. So it doesn't work like that, because who they are in the house is typically who they'll take outside. Of course, with variations and exaggerations here and there. But teaching kids about boundaries and self-care, teaching kids to rest, teaching kids to eat well, teaching kids to play and to honor themselves through these activities, not just through proving themselves to you all the time, then they're going to have more sacred inner boundaries.
And I'm thinking about all the different battles around boundaries, whether parents are thinking, do I let them dress themselves? Do they get to eat what they want to eat? If I put a meal in front of them and they say no, do I make something else, or do I hold a boundary and say, that's it, you've got to eat that? All these little questions. Is there anything you can say to the parent that's really trying to navigate all these little decisions of boundaries to kind of hold in their heart and in their mind when they're navigating some of these things?
Sure. I think in my book, The Awakened Family, I have a whole section on how to create a boundary, how to set a limit, how to know which boundary to create. Is it a life-affirming boundary, or is it just affirming your own ego? And I teach parents to kind of create a decision tree around these boundaries, but in a nutshell, typically if the boundary is enhancing their life, which really means that every human being on earth should have those boundaries, then I would say do it. So if you say you have to play the piano today, right? That's a boundary, but that's not serving the child's essence. That's not ubiquitous across all cultures. Not everyone is playing the piano. So obviously it's not life affirming. It's ego affirming. It's for you, right? So that's your kind of boundary. You can still lay it, but know it's coming from an egoic place. A life affirming boundary, just few: hygiene, safety, maybe getting to school on time, because school is a boundary. So when you are clear about your boundaries and you're simple about them and you've simplified them to just 5 or 6, and definitely in a day, just 1 or 2, then the kid is more likely to hear you and you're more likely to, quote unquote, enforce it, because you're coming from a clean place. But if you're all unboundaried about your boundaries and creating boundaries all over the place, then the kid is going to tune you out and you're not going to know how to handle so much. So the easier thing is to have a few, When you do have them, mean it, and just keep it clean. Otherwise, the rest of it is negotiating, finding creative ways to do it. There is no easy way to get your kid out the door. Every parent has struggled to get the kid out the door. You organize beforehand, you get up a little earlier, you're in a good state, you give a leeway time, right? Don't set yourself up for failure, but also know that this is the way of children. They take long time. They dawdle, they procrastinate, they get distracted. So part of our distress as parents is because we don't recognize who it is our children are.
And it goes back to absolutely, totally agree. And I'm also thinking as you're talking, this piece you mentioned earlier about overdosing on empathy. As a mother, we overdose on empathy and how the boundaries do get a little wishy-washy. Oh, well, I said no, but I feel bad now. And okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's our trademark, to be guilty, as I said, and to be wishy-washy and to waffle. So that's why in my book, The Awakened Family, I help parents to consolidate beforehand. What are your boundaries? Otherwise, don't even pretend, because you're losing mileage with your children. Better to start off negotiating if you're going to end up negotiating anyway.
Right.
So, but it takes that presence of mind and the belief that who we are is demonstrated, not to pretend we're going to become someone else. We are who we are. So let's work with who we are and have within us, rather than pretending we're some other kind of being.
I also love that too, because I also think it gives you and your partner a map to sort of follow. So when you are in the heat of the moment, there's no question. These are, I love how you say that in the Awakened Families. You're talking about the 5 or 6 boundaries, and maybe it's one a day, and just really getting clear about what is a life-sustaining boundary. That's what you said, correct? A life-sustaining boundary. I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah. So you have to kind of know, it's like knowing why you're doing something, right? Simon Sinek always says, know your why. If you don't know your why, then it's going to fall through quite easily.
Right.
It's going to be transient, and then it's going to be inconsistent, and then your kids are going to poke at you and rebel, and then you're going to get frustrated. So better to know at the outset why you're creating what you're creating.
Absolutely. And so last question for you. Once parents start on this work, mothers in particular, again, our audience is mostly mothers, what have you noticed, the self-transformation that can occur, the bond between mother and child? What are some of the fruits of this labor, so to speak, that you've noticed?
Well, so many fruits. First is the parents' own awakening and healing of their own past. And the second fruit is because the onus of conscious parenting is to constantly connect, and then correct. There's a greater connection, and children feel more heard, more seen, more understood and validated. And parents feel that way too. Yeah, it's more messy. Yes, there may be more disrespect even, because you're allowing a lot more than a not traditional parent would. But the kids feel at ease with you. The kids come and tell you their truth. They're not hiding and sneaking. So there's a balance, but the tipping is toward more trade-off than not.
Okay, great. That sounds wonderful, because it is, as you lay it out, as we've been talking in this podcast, it's a lot of work, and it's not for the faint of heart, and it definitely takes courage and determination, I'm imagining.
Absolutely. It takes a desire to change. And the change people believe happens in a moment. No, it's a lifelong process of a new way to be. So either you jump on board and commit to a whole new way of being, or this is going to be a momentary thing.
And also, I'm imagining people don't have to do it perfectly. Like there must be, if you're on this path and you're working all these pieces that you're laying out, and you're taking your course and you're reading your books, and then they get moments stuck in the old way. I'm imagining you also help them address some of the shame that perhaps happens.
Oh my goodness, all the time. There is no perfect destination. It's not supposed to look a certain way. I'm certainly far from ideal or perfect, so I never espouse that. It's all about being in the moment, showing up for who it is you are, and learning from your children that whatever is being triggered is not really triggered by them, but triggered by something from your past.
Such powerful information. Dr. Shefali, I know people are going to want to know more about you if they haven't heard about you already. How can they learn more about you and get some more information on your workshops? Sure.
Yeah. Big workshop starting in January, but they can find me at drshefali.com, and I've listed all my courses there and all the work I'm doing. So hopefully we can work with a few of your audience members.
That would be wonderful. And the course that's happening in January, would you like to share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I just completed a year-long course. It was called the Year of the Awakened Heart, and it just blew me away. I never thought we would have a huge tribe doing this every week. Every Tuesday, I teach a wisdom talk, which gives them a task for the week, and we focus on the teachings of how to deconstruct your psyche and enter an elevated state of existence. And on Thursday, I led a meditation, a group meditation online. And I can't tell you how transformative this experience has been, so much so that it's the course is finishing now, but I'm starting a whole brand new course in January 2018 called the Year of Manifestation. And every month we will touch on different topics and go deeper and really grow together as a community and as a self.
Wonderful. Well, I definitely will be checking that out myself, and hopefully a lot of our listeners will be too. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Melissa. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. As a mother of 2 young boys, it was really wonderful not only to interview Dr. Shefali, but also to hear some really practical takeaways as a parent. What rang true was around finding your own inner attunement and taking responsibility for your own self. I also love the pieces we talked about around boundaries. Don't forget, Dr. Shefali has a new workshop starting in January, the Year of Manifestation. And if you like this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review. To get our show notes, sign up for our e-course, and get more information, go to www.honestmamas.com/podcast and check out episode 13. Also, join our community on Facebook, and you can do that by going to facebook.com/honestmamascommunity, where these conversations and more will continue.